Thank you all for being here today. Really excited to have a conversation around grassroots initiatives. So thank you to the guests, Walid, Sara, and Wejdan today. And thank you for all of us, all of you guys that are joining and supporting us from both near and far. And for those that are joining us for the first time, welcome. I'm Sara. I'm an artist based in Abu Dhabi. And this Artist Talks initiative was started back in April. It's truly a platform for creatives in the community from one artist to another. And to also be surrounded by a community with these talks and be able to have these conversations is what I started. It's a place to inspire and speaking from experience to be inspired as well, to engage in conversations and to ask questions. So thank you everyone who's joining us today, and hopefully you'll tune into future sessions as well. So today's topic revolves around grassroots initiatives, as I mentioned before, with examples from the MENA region, specifically the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And this topic is of real interest to me as I've noticed the local scene slowly diversifying. And as someone who's quite involved with grassroots initiatives, and with this platform itself being an example of that, I thought it'd be a great conversation around it. And bringing forward questions of importance such as, who is your audience? Who do these initiatives push? How do these initiatives push the scene forward? And how can you sustain yourself? And today we have 3 guests joining us and sharing their experience around these topics and more. We have Sara bin Safwan, who is an Emirati Honduran curator based in Abu Dhabi and will be speaking about Banat Collective. We have Walid, Wawi, who is a Palestinian artist, curator, and educator based in London and will be speaking about Samt. And lastly, we have Wejdan, who is a Saudi Arabian curator based in Jeddah and will be speaking about Sahaba. They will each introduce their practice and their initiatives, and then we'll have a Q&A segment where we'll be taking questions from the audience. And I'd encourage all of you to unmute your mics if you do have a question, and if not, if you're not comfortable with that, then you can use the chat box instead. All right, so without further ado, let's start with our first guest. Sara bin Safwan is an active contributor to the arts and culture landscape in the UAE, working as curator in both institutional and grassroots levels. She currently works as a curator for the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi and is the founder and curator of Banat Collective. She has also received her BA in Culture, Criticism and Curation from Central St. Martin's, London in 2015, where she developed an interest in post-colonial theory. In 2016, she founded Banat Collective, an online platform which focuses on discussing intersectionality and womanhood within the regional context of MENA, through contemporary art and writing. She was also part of Art Jamil's Dubai's first edition of the Youth Assembly in 2019. And what I admire in Sara's work is her aim of inclusivity and bringing forward topics that are not necessarily spoken about openly and providing a space for that and beyond. So without further ado, if you'd like to share your screen, Sara.
Sure, and hello everyone. Thank you so much, Sara, for having me. I'm super excited to be part of this. You've been doing an amazing job so far with the Artist Talk series. So let me go ahead and open up my presentation. All right, just give me a thumbs up if you can see. Awesome. I'm here presenting to you today Banat Collective, which is an initiative that I started back in 2016. Banat Collective is dedicated to bringing forth discussions relating to Arab womanhood and throughout Middle East and North Africa and the diaspora, mainly through visual art, contemporary art, writing, poetry. And since then, we have done a numerous amount of activations and projects, but mainly we started out as a digital platform online, as that was the only way that seemed relevant and easy to connect with. And what we were doing since then was just kind of doing like interviews and features on the Instagram and website, which also at the end of the day was bringing together you know, a lot of community and network for people to meet together and collaborate as well. Since then, it has grown, and we've done multiple projects, from small scale exhibitions and talks, as well as publishing our own book. Recently, Sara al-Grubi has come on to the project as a co-curator, and we're currently working on an exhibition together, which I'm really excited to introduce closer to the end of this presentation. So I'm just going to be showing you sort of like the artists and the artworks that, you know, we have presented, you know, various artists from not only just the UAE, but all over the Arab region, and even Arabs living outside of the region as well. And over time, we were just kind of making this platform to amplify voices and build a creative community together in order to discuss about topics that weren't necessarily spoken about publicly before. Usually you would find these discussions happening within closed spaces and in private and in secret. And so this was a way for us to express certain ideas that were otherwise wouldn't be heard. And then our first ever project, which was in the middle of it all, which is our first independently published book. Throughout the book, we collaborated with 31 artists and poets and writers who submitted to a call, and the call was basically all about the coming of age story of the Arab girl or woman, and this really intimately told that narrative through various artworks. And it was really exciting for this kind of topic to be shown in this way, because a lot of people necessarily, didn't necessarily know about these issues, especially topics of taboo. And so we touch upon issues of, beauty standards and ideals, as well as, other very complex issues, the body, sexual harassment, and sisterhood as well, and kind of bringing all of these things together in order to tell that narrative. And at the end of the day, this was more so for a platform to allow these voices to be heard, and also kind of like a reclamation of that narrative. And yeah, so basically here are some of the artists that we've seen as well. And also all of these artists, we continue to collaborate them on other projects as well. It's not only just into one project or the other. And this was a really great way for us to collaborate and build that community. Most recently as well, last year in 2019, we were invited to participate in Gulf Now in the Art Dubai Fair in 2019, which was curated by Munira Sayef. And we opened up, this was our first physical booth where we just, sorry, it's kind of like, it's going ahead without me, and so I'm trying to like speak and I don't know how to pause it. I'm not sure why either. So basically in this iteration of Art Dubai, this was our first physical project, and it was really interesting for us to be working in such a space, which was a commercial art fair, and for grassroots initiatives to come forward into a very different audience. We were so used to having digital audiences that really were already interested in our ideas and our voice, where this was kind of more of a random choosing. But at least people who were interested in the artistic field. And so here we have an artwork by Jannah Ghalini, who is a Saudi artist, and we did this interactive installation where people could come and actually write onto this fabric, and we had prompted some questions in order for them to write about, and it was really interesting to see people kind of interact with the artwork as well. And then we also had Sara Alagrubi's poetry performance video piece, which also was displayed there and talked about basically notions of whitewashing and identity, and people were really interested to actually see and know about an initiative like ours that actually existed in the UAE, and it kind of was for them really surprising, as they would have never thought that this sort of thing would exist in the UAE, which is kind of crazy to think. And then currently, these are some of the examples of live panels and things that we've done. Most recently, I visited and was invited to the Arab Feminism Forum in the Institut du Monde Arabe in Paris, which was also really interesting because at the end of the day, Banat Collective served as a platform to amplify voices for these creatives. But in that context, it was really interesting because it was such a different and foreign audience for them to come and listen to all of these speakers speak about Arab feminism. Essentially, for them, it was a new terrain, and it's not that, you know, Banat Collective was seeking to abolish stereotypes about Arab women, and that is not the priority of us. That is sort of like this byproduct that just happens to happen, and it was really interesting to see kind of those reactions from that particular audience. And then recently we just we're working on our first full-fledged exhibition, and we're working with a local institution here in the UAE to bring this forward. And we recently let out a call for submission back in February. It ended, I believe, and so currently we're working on this, and it is all about this notion of the mystical woman, and bringing this idea of kind of reassessing and redefining what the idealized woman has been created and what we can create it to be, and sort of kind of recreating those definitions of that. And so currently we're working on this, and I'm hopefully excited to be sharing more news of this in the future as well. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you for that introduction of the initiative. Just an initial question for that. I can see that the initiative has taken quite a few formats, whether it is through talks or a publication or a future exhibition, inshallah. So can you just talk about how, has that been like an adaptive process, or is that something that you have initially set out to do when you established it?
Right, so from the beginning, as I said, we really were kind of in the digital domain, and that was pretty much the only place that we operated from. But for me, my interests as, you know, educating as a curator, and then also working in Guggenheim Abu Dhabi as a curator, my ideas of, you know, these projects do somehow just be envisioned in exhibition format. And that is a really enjoyable format that I love, because it really brings it out into the public sphere and makes it accessible for people to understand as well. And that's what I'm really excited about, bringing forward this exhibition as well. Hopefully, you know, it will be a really new topic to introduce in exhibitions, and particularly in the UAE. You know, it is all about speaking about these issues of taboo and women's issues, which aren't really normally spoken about out in public.
Right. Thank you so much. So we'll be moving on to our second guest, Walid. So Walid al-Wawi is a Jordanian Palestinian native working in painting, performance, video, and installation. He received critical acclaim for his academic and purist approach to objects and physical documentation that dialogue with the political and cultural identity of the Palestinian body in diaspora, its implication on the post-colonial stream of Pan-Arabism and vice versa. He was part of Steve's first cohort and through that received a scholarship which earned him his master's degree in fine arts by the Central St. Martin's University of Arts, London. Through his practice, Wejdan has had solo exhibitions as well as group shows in Jameel Art Center and Art Dubai, just to name a few, and was a resident with the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in South Korea. Since some establishment, Walid mentored and curated the works of numerous aspiring artists from the MENA and collaborated with the Tate Exchange, Darat al-Funun, and many other renowned galleries and foundations around the globe. And with Walid's work, I really appreciate his boldness and accessibility and free expression and creating a space for artists in the community to come together for both art and dialogue. So, Walid, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. I'm going to try to share my screen and I hope it works.
All right.
Yeah, just 1 second. Where is it? It's for Zoom. I think that should work. Is it on now?
No.
Okay. Just 1 second. Hello?
No, it's not working.
Not sure why that's happening. Oh, okay, here we go. Got to figure it out.
Okay.
All right. Can you see?
Yeah.
Fantastic. To just repeat what Sara said, but really briefly, my name is Walid Wawi. I am an artist and a self-proclaimed curator, you can say. I was born and raised in Sharjah and have been practicing art for around 10 years. Moved to London 5 years ago and kind of just stayed there. While I was in London, I was doing my master's in fine arts at Central St. Martin's. And when I was done with it, I kind of had this extreme frustration by the way the art scene in the UK or the art initiatives in the UK were actually viewing me as a Palestinian or Arab artist. I felt like there was a lot of exotification and tokenization of my actual struggles or my topics. And at the same time, there was a lot of very careful tiptoeing around anything I say or I do. That kind of made me miss this feeling of being free and being a part of this community in the Middle East or in the UAE especially, where my art career started. Sorry, just 1 second. Excuse me. Yeah, so sorry, I had to tell people to stop talking. Anyway, so that made me miss the art scene in the UAE and the freedom that I had when I expressed my concerns, whether politically or culturally, not in the sense of of course, there is a lot of censorship in the region here, but at the same time, there was a lot of understanding from people in the scene, people in the cultural scene around me. So if I speak about Palestine, there is already an understanding of where that is, what's going on. While in the UK, there was a lot of lack of understanding or knowledge, and at the same time, there was a lot of tiptoeing around it and trying not to discuss it or talk about it, which did not really develop my work forward. So out of frustration, I decided to create a space that is a virtual space that would allow me to reconnect with the art scene in the Middle East without having to fly back and forth and leave the UK. At the same time, it would allow me to work with like-minded people and actually continue to push this concept of research through art and etc. So Samt is basically the Arabic word for silence, and it manifests in a digital format strictly. We work in biannual volumes, so every 2 years. And we have structured a mentorship program that we basically mentor artists, the selected artists for around 9 months, and then exhibit the resulting work for the rest of the year. Our main goal was basically to expand on these 5 main pillars. I don't know if you can see them. So the first one is censorship and conversation, and that was a very important objective for us, because we exist online and virtually, and we were one of the first around, especially in the Middle East. We kind of used that as a method to allow artists who live in culturally controlled or censored regions, whether it's political or cultural, to find a space and a group of people where they can actually research and discuss and talk about the taboo topics, or the topics that can get you into trouble, as our parents would say. So we use this, the idea of being virtual and the tool of anonymity, where artists can actually opt out of having their name be mentioned under their work and actually use a pseudonym instead. Then the way it would work is that the artist's name would only be revealed if the artist and the person who asked for the identity of the artist both agree to share the identity of the artist. Our second mission was to open accessibility for art, basically to have art from the Middle East or from from North Africa be accessible all over the world with absolutely no restrictions. So you don't have to travel to see it. You don't have to walk to the museum to see it, or a gallery space to see it, or wait for an event or an art fair. It's always online. It's always accessible, especially with the fact that around 70% of our daily life are spent in front of a screen. Being a digital platform have become, and exhibiting the work digitally has become a lot more natural for us to consume than if to consume it in real life. So the third part was the mentorship and research, and I kind of touched on that a little bit. Basically, we give a mentorship program of 9 months for the artists that we select for each volume, where they go through workshops, they go through critiques, and we kind of help them build longevity in their practice. Exposure and opportunity, which falls under the name SALT. SALT is Arabic for noise, and it's kind of the parallel of sound. And it is not in any way primary, it is secondary to SALT. SALT is the digital platform, but SALT is those small exhibitions or small workshops or small physical gatherings that we do all around the world, whether it's in Jordan, London, Sharjah, Dubai, etc. And they kind of always complement the actual exhibition that exists on SALT online. Finally, our urban mission, which is something we're expanding on currently. Our urban mission is basically to convert as many spaces around, currently Sharjah is our main target, into art galleries or art spaces, for people to be able to have workshops, community activities, etc. in these spaces. Yeah, so we'll get to that soon. So this is the preview of our volumes. This is the first and the second volume. The way it would function is that I kind of structured it that it goes in a very narrative format on the website. So it's as if you're scrolling through a blog. Each work is is after another, and there is a cyclical kind of arrangement. So the entire exhibition by the end would be a full narrative that has a beginning and a conclusion of some sort. Of course, conclusion can be of no conclusion. So so far we've had 4 volumes. Those are the first 2, and some of the works on them. Throughout these 4 volumes, we basically worked with more than 30 young artists and produced more than 40 original works in the process. We've only been around for 3 years, but it's been absolutely busy and hectic as hell. Some of the works that we're kind of proud of, to be honest, is Reem Falak Nasser's work, If a Hymen Breaks and No One Hears It, which was a part of volume 3. And the artwork she went through a mentorship program of 6 months with me and Sargon Lachin, the co-founder of Summit with me. And she basically did this amazing expose about the business of hymen rejuvenation in the Middle East, especially in the Gulf region, where she contacted clinics, what are they called? Clinics, sheikhs, etc., to kind of get to know how is the fear mongering of this kind of virginity taboo topic can bring girls to basically their knees and pay money and fall for these kind of scams all over the Middle East. This exhibition, this work has been exhibited in one of our physical spaces in Sharjah, which we'll get to later, and also at our Jameen later on. One other work is Saddam's Love for the Sea, which was a part of our first volume. It was an interview with Dimka Lachin, who is an Assyrian Iraqi architect. He was the favorited architect of Saddam Hussein at the time of the regime. He created many of the Iraqi embassy, as well as fitted the entirety of the ships of Saddam Hussein. And he's the father of the co-founder Sargon Lachin. The sound previews that we had, which again it's just like a secondary initiative to some, happened in many galleries and museums around the world, including the Tate Exchange in London, which was the first place we had a token. And then we went to Dar al-Funun in Amman and Greyno's Gallery in Dubai, as well as Satellite Art Space. Those are some of the exhibitions we had. As you can see, the Flag Continent, which had Shamal Amri, Sara Mazinet, and Tara Adouether on Tate Exchange in London. Qala, which happened in Satellite with Arnoud El Abeidi, Jamari, Tulip Hasbar, Maisel Bake in Satellite as well. In the lab in Dar al-Funun, we had Mosul Matrushi, Tara Adouether, Mazin Ash'ar, Maisel Bake, and in Grey Noise, we had Jamari, Mazin Ash'ar, Maisel Bake. Yeah, for the exhibitions. Finally, our mission was expanding starting from 2018, where we actually converted 2 spaces to become a physical locality for some, where we can actually create events and workshops and classes and whatnot. The first one was Rooftop Mushroom, which is a random women's tailoring shop somewhere in Sharjah. It's actually close to what now is the Sharjah Art Foundation's Flying Saucer structure. And this kind of tailoring shop has been converted entirely to become a gallery space or a space for community gatherings. What we did with it is that we made sure that it does not stand up like a sore thumb. So it kind of still camouflages with the community around it, because it had the area has a community that is a little bit, that we can say is isolated from the art scene or the art community. and we did not want to be intruders to that space. So we covered the entire front of it with curtains, and you had to enter the space to be able to be bombarded by art or to see what's going on in it. But otherwise, it wouldn't at all disrupt the regular movement of people. Within this space, we had our first exhibition in it was for Moza al-Maturshi, as well as Reem Falaknaz. Another thing we did in it was some community events where we converted it to something we called Masaha, where people could just come in and have free coffee and cakes and free Wi-Fi and just do work. And that happened during Ramadan in a way to just help the community get together in that area and activate that area itself artistically as well as critically. At the same time, we also did a lot of meditation sessions. We did sound healing sessions, etc. Yeah. The second space we converted was my studio in the Sharjah Art Foundation Collections building. And Studio 2 is currently still converted to whatever it is now. Within it, we had exhibitions as well as a lot of social activities. One of the exhibitions we had in it is of our current volume, volume 4. And then after that, we converted it into what we call the collapsed bookcase library, where we just put a bookcase down and we filled it up with books, and people can come and donate books and read books, etc. The space is open from 9 to 9, so anyone can come in and actually read whatever is available. Yeah, so finally, I will just go really quickly through the current volume, and we can stop there. Sorry for that. Here we go. Yeah, so this is the Sump website, just to give you an idea of how it actually works. You either go to the volume or you go to school. School is where we have a set of books that we have selected, and they're accessible for everyone to read. And if you go back and go to the volume 4, that is where the exhibition is. Within this volume, the volume started digital. It's been co-curated with Tara DeGaither. And within this volume, we had 3 fantastic artists that we worked with. Sara Brahim and Sara Brahim, Sara Al-Agrubi, and Abdurrahim Al-Kindi. Sara, the concept of Dajjal kind of tackled the idea of this social media and the way our identity as Middle Easterns have been shifting due to the hyper exposure to content, images, colors, sounds, news, etc. And then we had Sara create this beautiful dance piece that connected her to her homeland in Saudi, from Brooklyn to Saudi, and she previewed this shift in her that she used to feel whenever she flew from said space to another. After that, we had the fantastic Sara Al-Agrubi, who created a dreamlike video montage of her memories of her grandmother who passed away in Syria, and she could not attend the funeral. She also wrote a beautiful poem that is attached to it, so you feel free to go to sub.co and read it. And finally, we had Abdurrahim Al-Kindi, who created a grave that represents the mythical story of Al-Khidr, who is a prophet in Islam, and who there was a story where he killed a child because of orders from God, and he wanted to kind of deal with this concept of acceptance of death if it comes from a hierarchy of some sort. Finally, yeah, that's all. I guess that is all for me.
Thank you, Walid. And in the chat box, I'm gonna put everyone's websites that will link back to their initiative. So if you guys have time or missed anything or would like to look at something in more detail, I just posted it for Banat and Samt and Sahaba. And last but not least, we have Wejdan, who is a Saudi contemporary art curator and founder of Sahaba, a consultancy agency and research hub dedicated to serve the art community through providing specialized service to artists, galleries, and institutions. Born in 1992 in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where she is currently based, Wejdan has lived in the United Kingdom for several years to pursue her education and holds a master's degree in curating contemporary art from the Royal College of Art, as well as a bachelor's degree in contemporary media practice with first-class honors from University of Westminster. Most recently, she's been undertaking a curatorial fellowship as part of Art Jameen Hay campus, as well as working with the Saudi Ministry of Culture as a curatorial consultant. And with Wejdan's work, I appreciate the support she lends to the community she is in through providing a physical space that is activated in multiple ways, whether it be through discussion, workshops, or consulting, and aiming at bridging the gap between community and institution. So thank you, Wejdan, for being here today.
Thank you, Sara. So let me start perhaps. Okay, so as you kind of mentioned earlier, so Sahaba is a consultancy agency and research hub. Our focus is to serve the art community through providing specialized curatorial consultancy as well as artist consultancy, ranging to artists, initiatives, institutions, and governmental entities. So our goal is to support the exciting development of the local art scene, as well as the artists' individual journeys through our dedicated programs. In addition, we try to provide a space for engagement, dialogue, critical discussions, and so on. So Sahaba started in 2019. It was officially launched, and that was after my graduation from the MA degree. It was during that time that I realized that there is perhaps a gap that we wanted to fill, which is between kind of the experiences that you kind of gain within the art school and then before the entry into the institutional system or the gallery system. And we wanted to support the artists within that period. So as well as kind of providing that curatorial consultancy and services to galleries and institutions. So I'm going to talk a bit about one of our most recent and pre-corona events, which is Intimate Dimensions. So we had the opportunity to exhibit with Hafiz Gallery during 21, which is the Saudi Art Week. And we had a lot of support from Qaswara, who invited us to create an exhibition for that space. So just to give you a quick a bit of context about Hafiz Gallery. Hafiz Gallery is one of the few contemporary art galleries in Saudi Arabia. It used to reside in a domestic villa in a domestic space that was transformed into exhibition spaces. And for us, that was kind of the focus into the conceptualizing of the exhibition. So the idea of the exhibition started actually from the space itself. What did that space mean? How did it look? Who used to live in that space? What's the story of kind of the repurposing of that house into an exhibition spaces? So the space was built, or the villa was built in the 1970s, and it was constructed based on a two-story model house, which can be spotted around the city of Jeddah in Saudi, except for that particular space, which was realized as a single-story villa to fit the spatial and living needs of Saad, who was the previous owner of that space and who actually commissioned the construction of that space. So it was supposed to kind of represent an ideal home for an owner who never occupied the space. Unfortunately, she passed away before ever living in that space. So I always kind of wondered about kind of what would have been, or perhaps the type of idealism that were placed upon that particular constructed space. So the space was kind of configured and reconfigured, and it kind of represents the various shifts of a particular space from domestic to commercial, from an imagined ideal home to a gallery space, and it highlights the duality and changing nature of built structures. So with that kind of intention, I kind of started speaking with the artists. Unfortunately, we had a very limited time to actually pull off the exhibition altogether. So we had around 4 weeks to 3 weeks to actually put the exhibition together. So it was a very intense / exciting time, and I was very fortunate to have the support of the participant artists, including Filwa Nazir, Afra Bahiri, Sara Mihari, which is you, our host today, Sara Ibrahim, and Janelle. So I'm just gonna show you a few images of the exhibition, just to kind of go through it. So most of the works kind of focused on the exploration of spaces, the energies within the space, the memory of a space, the physical exploration of a space, which can be also seen at Sara Ibrahim's performance, and that was also visualized in Janaghalini's work. So after that, during this year and during the whole corona outbreak, we started to think about, okay, with the absence of physical exhibition spaces, how can we still contribute and still create opportunities for artists to participate during this difficult time? So we decided on creating an open call that was based on a very special book, which is Species of Spaces, and we created this open call and invited artists to read chapters of the book, which we also shared on social media, and respond to what they find, if they connected to a certain paragraph or so. And we received a variety of submissions, and here are some of the works that we've received. So this is by Reda Ahmed, and then we received by Ben. He created an interesting scanning of his studio space and all the multiple Zoom meetings that he had to actually do throughout Corona time. And he ended up creating this very interesting work, and then Khulud al-Bakr as well. So this is it kind of for me, but I'm happy to answer any of your questions if you have anything. So thank you for giving me the time to speak today.
I'm muted.
Sara, you're
No, thank you so much, and thank you to all three of you who introduced your initiatives and just like the practice you guys bring forward to your communities. So this would be the time if anyone has questions to unmute your mic and have a more natural conversation. But if not, I'll start us off with a question, and mine is: do your initiatives or projects aim to bridge the gap between institution and community? And how do you also grow opportunities for yourself, separate from the institution? So if anyone would like to answer that first.
Sure. So I think definitely, the creation of Banat was also a direct response to the lack of creative spaces, independent creative spaces, particularly in the UAE, which is where I was based and where I was going back to when I finished my studies in London. back in 2015, there were not as many independent spaces as we see now. And in that time, this was a way also for me to connect back to my own community and use it as a network to find creatives who were like-minded and wanted to discuss ideas. I think the gap currently is becoming smaller and smaller the more creative communities have been coming up, and institutions have been wanting to work with us as well. And that has also been really interesting. And it was never about being anti-institution, but just more about providing a diverse amount of creative production in the locale. And so I think that, you know, institutions do work from a very particular way. I mean, particularly in the UAE, institutions are also managed by the government as well. And so with that in tandem, there is a very specific approach into the way that they work. So in a sense, starting these independent initiatives were a way for us to kind of diversify that, you know, that playground, and also have this, you know, freedom to express what we wanted as well. And, you know, and in terms of the opportunities, there is definitely a lot of room to be working in collaboration with each other. I think that independent spaces and institutions have very similar goals, but just work differently and have different missions, but definitely can, you know, have like a very, you know, informative and collaborative bond.
Right, and even since you work kind of on both ends or in both spheres, you recently had a project that was led by the Guggenheim that called In the Studio, which I think was a great way to bridge or attempt at like bridging the gap between both these like community-based things and the institutions as well. I thought that was really brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that project was super interesting for me to work on. I had my, you know, institutional hat on and also my independent grassroots hat on, and so finally the two were merging together, and it was really great for us in Guggenheim Abu Dhabi to be, you know, opening that side of our programming into, you know, basically our own domain, where the museum will be opening in the future. You know, this is our public, this is our audience and target that, you know, we want to have a relationship with. And so, you know, having the In the Studio program open its arms to artists residing in Abu Dhabi was a way for us to also support the creative ecosystem.
Right.
I may add something. I agree with Sarah completely. But at the same time, for me, or for SOMT itself, I think I could have a problem with the terminology of bridging a gap. I don't think at least what we're doing is bridging a gap that kind of has this feeling of being pre-institutional and post-human. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is to exist as an alternative to the institution. I think one of the most important goals of SOMT is to let artists know that they can get up and find an empty space and hang paintings and call it an exhibition without the accreditation of an institution that's either pushed by the government or pushed by a millionaire somewhere. So what we're trying to do is to not really bridge a gap as much as be an alternative and be an empowering alternative for young artists in the region. As a young artist here, I have really struggled with institutions for so long, and Now working on Summit, I understand that I don't need the institution. Not to say that institutions are legitimate or anything, but at the same time, I do believe that our efforts as artists are creating our spaces and our grassroots initiatives can be a challenging thing for institutions, and we're allowed to challenge them instead of actually just try to bridge a gap. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
No, it completely does. And I think just to add on to that, this idea of not only being an alternative, but being an equal and being legitimate and having this presence that is almost as equal, if not equal to these like big time players out there. Which Dan, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I guess I actually agree with both Walid and Sara and their kind of perspectives. I do see, for example, what we were doing at Sahaba is an attempt to kind of provide that for example, the consultancy services to the artists who mostly are independent artists or they're part of the gallery system, but try to kind of provide the extra kind of support that they usually wouldn't find perhaps in the institutional system that already exists, and to try to also provide more information on how to actually collaborate with institutions, with other grassroots roots initiatives, and to try to provide as much information as possible, as well as a space to contemplate and to reflect on what happens in the wider art scene, and to provide that safe space for that healthy discussion to actually take place. Another thing that perhaps I would like to highlight is the idea of kind of a research hub, a space for breathing, for trying to find kind of like-minded people to just speak and to discuss ideas and to discuss possible projects. And I feel that I want to highlight that aspect more at Sahaba, because it is a much needed space. As you mentioned before, I'm a UK graduate, so I lived in the UK for 6 to 7 years, and I always felt that I had that space within the art school. So what happens beyond that? What happens when you're out of the art school, when you're out of that pre-established community, and then you kind of meet up with artists during openings and during exhibitions? Okay, so what happens in between those times, or between those heightened kind of moments of connectivity during the art week and so? So that's where Sahaba then comes to place, which is between these moments, and try to provide, as I said, kind of the space and the support for the artists and at times to the institutions to better connect with the art community as well.
Definitely. In the comments, initials YB had a few questions.
Hi. Yes. Firstly, thank you, everyone. And it's interesting that you started the discussion with asking about the institutions, because that's kind of related to the questions that came up for me when I was listening to everybody speak. Yeah, so I guess I'll just shoot 2 questions. The first one being, I was wondering how you fund your projects. For example, in the case of both Walid and Sara, you spoke about having a website, and even though that seems like a sort of like a simple platform to have for any project, that comes with its own costs. And then of course there's costs if you want like a physical space for your projects. So the issue of funding was like a question for me, and it related to institutions, because some of you mentioned like partnerships with institutions, and for example, having a space to exhibit within Art Dubai or within Sharjah Art Foundation. And I was wondering if that was sort of something that was related to this funding question, and whether relationships for institutions for you can be just a means to sort of realizing parts of your project that you need, like support for, whether it be like financially or like spatially. So yeah, so those were my two questions about funding and how do you approach or build relationships with institutions?
I think I can answer that from my direction. In a way, we really struggle with funding. That's not an easy thing to get, especially if you're trying to kind of stay out of the boundaries of what the institutions or the funding institutions that exist around would allow you to like talk about or discuss or whatever it is. So the way I've funded some so far has always been out of my own pocket or my partner's pocket. So at the same time, I've kind of made sure that I minimized the cost as much as possible to be as little as possible, and relied on like-minded contributions and collaborations with other people. So, for example, the tailoring shop is actually a shop that belongs to one of my best friends, and she never used it. She used it as storage space. And when I got that space, before that, I had an agreement with an art center in Sharjah to do an exhibition with them. But then last minute they pulled out because the topic was too sensitive. It was the reincarnated topic, but harm rejuvenation. And just a week before the exhibition, they decided they cannot exhibit it. So that is where you kind of go into your like your contacts and go like, who can help me? How can I get this done? Because it's really not about, I mean, the money and the funding is very important for us to survive, but at the same time, it is not the only way for us to survive. And that is something that young artists and curators need to understand to an extent. That there is this alternative way of achieving things. And when that exhibition was pulled from us, it was a very devastating thing because we had built the hopes of the artist to exhibit that, etc. And my friend just stepped in and said, you can take the tailoring shop, you can just convert it. And we literally painted it by hand. We moved things around. We borrowed a plank from a gallery in UAE as well. And we put it there and we were like, this is an art space. So funding is important, but I don't think it is primary yet, not as yet. At the same time, working with institutions, even though what we try to do with SUBD is to exist as an alternative to institutions or as an equal to institutions. And that could mean at the beginning, you must stay away from institutions to define yourself and to stand on your own feet and have credibility. At the same time, we realize that we can work with institutions and we can both benefit each other as long as none of us none of the two parties kind of enforces something on the other that would go against their objective. If that happens, then the relationship is equal and therefore it is possible. But once you start being an employed space to an institution, that is where it all goes haywire, in my opinion. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I agree with what Walid says, and in the case of Banat, yeah, everything is self-funded, out of pocket. Even at times when I had contributors, especially working on the book, which was the most expensive thing that I have done, which was completely out of pocket to print everything. And then myself and everyone that had worked on it did it on a purely volunteer contribution basis. But that is sometimes just kind of what you have to do in order to make, your projects be realized. But I definitely do understand, at the end of the day, we do need to be paid for the work that we do, because a lot of hours do go into it. For Art Dubai, it was so great because the project owners actually gave everyone in that space a reimbursable budget. And that was after a lot of discussion and pushing that, otherwise all the other grassroots initiatives wouldn't have been able to, you know, transport or create the spaces that they needed. And, you know, so in that sense, that is definitely a huge impact that institutions can provide. That's undeniable. But I think, you know, as we scale and as we grow our credibility, and start running it more like a business, and just to make it, you know, stand on its own, then yeah, hopefully that will come in time. Hopefully, inshallah.
Wejdan, there's a specifically just going off of that question, someone would like to know how you provide a physical space independently in Saudi Arabia, and the idea of a domestic space that turns into a community space is intriguing, but under the current circumstances, unauthorized groups might not be the most appealing approach for other artists in our audience. I'd like to respond to that.
Thank you so much for your question. This is something that I actually thought about a lot. So I just want to clarify, first of all, that the exhibition that I talked about was actually at Hafiz Gallery at their particular space. So Sahaba's actual physical space is in an office building. Of course, ideally, I would have wanted something that is more intimate, more domestic, that is more approachable, to begin with, but going through kind of the legal aspect of running a business, you actually have a lot of kind of legal papers that you need to go through in order to establish a space to allow this dialogue to actually take place and happen. So we currently occupy an office space that is small, but fits all the activities that we're trying to do. In terms of funding, I know that question was kind of directed to me in a sense, but I also want to contribute to that. So Sahaba is also, it started as purely self-funded. And then out of the realization that it's not going to be sustainable if I kind of continue to kind of not being able to kind of work with perhaps institutions and so on, I've decided to add another focus, which is the curatorial services. So for me, the way we try to run it at Sahaba is that it would have, in a sense, these two strands, where the curatorial services, in a sense, provide these professional services to institutions and to allow us to actually fund the other strand, which is the more community-based, community outreach, the public programming, the research hub, the physical space, actually, in order to make it more sustainable and to try. And this is our way in trying to kind of be part of the larger artistic community, as we see that there's a real need for the services that we do provide through the space and the type of support that we do provide. But in terms of kind of just going back to the original question of kind of how to establish independently, well, you either kind of go underground and authorized, but for me personally, this is not how I kind of approached it. We had to go through all the papers or all the legal kind of aspects of having a sijil tijari, of having kind of a commercial license, of having, you know, all the permits and tarakhis, which was a very long and exhausting process, actually. But still, the office space is not completely ideal also for artists. But we're hoping that in the future this will change and we would create a more intimate space wherever it is legally permitted, I guess.
Shada, if you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Thanks for this great talk. So I had a question. So actually both Sant and Banat started as digital projects or virtual spaces. And so before branching out, you know, IRL, while Sahaba was actually in the reverse. So I'm really curious to hear your observations about what it was like working digitally to begin with, specifically as it related to your unique mandates. So for example, like Banat with regarding like Arab women, for example, or Samt with your focus on censorship or conversations that aren't always easy to have. And what being virtual afforded you in that sense, and then what was it like to move into the physical spaces, whether temporarily or otherwise? And then the second part of the question, you know, Wejdan, what it like you are now moving into digital, as is the rest of the art world, kind of trying to catch up with doing art online. So if any of you guys actually had comments or interesting observations about where you're at now with you know, pandemic world art and being digital. Thanks.
So with Banat, yes, digital was really the most affordable way and the most accessible way for, you know, connectivity and building that network. Otherwise, you know, at the time when I moved back to the UAE, there was no space to physically go to, you know, it would have only been, you know, I guess like you know, gallery openings, but even that in itself was quite intimidating. And in order for us to spread our and awareness of our project, you know, the digital space was very easy to connect with people, say, in Saudi, in Kuwait, or even all the way to Canada and Australia and all of these places that we would have never touched. And so digital space was very, very important for that. And then, yeah, definitely the differences going into the physical world. You know, it's very, very different. Especially in Dubai, as I said, it was commercial space where it was a lot of international audiences that came and then were introduced to us in that way, which was also very, very interesting. But it does work even differently, say, with sort of the content that we want to produce. So always thinking about going into the physical space, we sort of have to think a little bit more about how the art and the mission is going to be perceived. Whereas I feel as though in the digital space, it can be a little bit more authentic and free-flowing with that expression. You know, for example, even with the book, I had multiple opportunities to actually seek out grants in order to produce the book, but actually just did not end up going with that because of, you know, these institutions wanting to have their own imprint in the book, which I then felt was, you know, with implications of censorship and things like that, that is definitely not the route that we wanted to get into.
My answer to this is in regards to censorship. Basically, when I chose to go in a digital path, of course, it was first easily accessible to everyone and to me. Also, I've been a website developer for so long, so I could use that skill and utilize it to create a space. It's cheaper, definitely, to run a digital space than to run an actual one, and you don't need to go through all the legal work, which is also very good. What I've faced going from digital to physical has been kind of, I don't know, has been a bit tough in a way, because being digital allowed us to create work and put it up there anonymously, while I'm not kind of get persecuted if we put an exhibition up that is, for example, offensive or whatnot. The maximum a country with censorship would do is to block it. But then, I mean, everyone knows how to use a VPN in any country that has censorship. So you can always have access to it. Well, if you actually exhibit something sensitive in a physical space, the government can come or the authorities can come and actually remove the work, and then no one can have access to it. So being digital had more pathways to actually surpass the censorship. And at the same time, for example, when we moved Green Falak Nasser's work from the digital space to the physical space, it was in the tailoring shop. It was a terrifying thing to do because it was in Sharjah, it was within a community that's conservative. The topic was a bit too extreme. What I had to do, for example, is after setting up the show, is turn the lights off in the gallery and shut the door, hide in a car outside, and wait. If I see any person coming to visit, I would run out to the car, turn the lights on, and open the door and let them in. Because I did not want anyone to see the exhibition and be able to enter it if they did not come with intention to see the exhibition. So that kind of thing that you have to do for the exhibition was, I think, 15 days. And for 15 days, I would just park in front of the space and I would keep the lights off and I would just wait for someone to come to see the exhibition and then open the door for them. That's something you don't have to face if you do things digitally. That kind of effort, that kind of pain, that kind of fear that you don't have to face if you do things digitally. And that is where it kind of I started understanding that being digital has to be the primary. It's very difficult for us to go physical. And in fact, a lot of galleries and institutions that we worked with and collaborated with, we had to come up with ways to compromise. There were some compromises, and it's unfortunate, but there were actually some compromises to help save the person who kind of, keep the person safe who had gave us the opportunity in the institution. Because they're usually a friend and they come to you and go, like, can we not exhibit this work because I might get into trouble? And then you have to kind of deal with that human aspect of the relationship rather than just an academic one. So yeah, I think digital is definitely the way to go for us. And it does have a lot of benefits, especially in a region like the Middle East.
So for us, like the plan was originally is to have physical space, because as we kind of mentioned before, between kind of the underground, I guess, meetings in artist studios, and then you have the gallery spaces, but there wasn't much space in between to kind of for artists to gather, for that type of dialogue to occur beyond the online or virtual space. So for us, that was a priority, and we also had, and it still remains a priority. Hopefully, if we can be able to return to life normally after Corona. But yeah, so for us, that was kind of a transition. After Corona, like with the digital, that was the transition that we had to undertake, in a sense. But a physical space for us remains kind of a priority. I hope that kind of answers your question. But I guess it is still difficult for us to turn into the virtual space. Perhaps it's the other way around with Walid and Sara's experience, where the virtual comes a bit easier for them, I guess. But for us, it is a struggle to turn kind of the type of dialogue that we used to have in the physical space into the virtual. Although it does 100% provide more outreach into the wider community than being limited into proximity to a certain space or in a certain city or in a certain country to be able to access these conversations. But this is something that we're always considering and reconsidering and trying to kind of configure as we go. In a sense, the habit is not a fixed form. We're always trying to grow as we learn more and as we listen to the experiences of the people who are visiting us or working with us, and also from our colleagues who push us at times to do things and to experiment more. So yeah.
There are two questions left, but if you guys could keep your answers to a couple of sentences, since we're ending this session. There's one from, sorry if I butcher your name, Salam or Salim Rashid.
Yes, it's Salim Rashid. Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Salim. I work for Weber Shandwick Public Relations. I was involved in the artist community in Toronto, and I'm new to Abu Dhabi and just learning about all of the wonderful artists this part of the world. So it's great to be here. Thank you. Walid and others, you were talking about the benefits of art in the digital space, but I wanted to know, when it comes to experiential art, and sorry if you've touched on this earlier in the conversation, I was a bit late to join, but how well have you seen experiential art during COVID being translated into the digital space? Because I know it's a bit more difficult.
I think I'm not sure I understood the question very well, but I'm going to try to answer anyway. We've seen a lot of galleries and museums trying to transform to a digital space, and in my opinion, it has been done in a very kind of quick, and I don't think it was actually. It looked unintended. It looked like a secondary to what the physical is, rather than actually standing out on its own, as an experience. The thing that disappointed me the most during the COVID experience, the COVID issue, and the way the galleries had tried to change their experiences to become digital, is that they literally just copy pasted rather than actually looked into the way we navigate the digital and the way we actually communicate with the digital, and how can they benefit art from that, instead of just escaping this issue that's happening where people cannot access the building and then deciding to transfer the building from 3D to 2D. Sorry, I'm being brief. Yeah.
No, you're fine. There are a few questions coming in, but I probably will compile them and send them to you guys first. But just to end, I think this question would be great. What are you guys planning on doing next, and what would you like to see happen in the art scene with your efforts or influence? Yeah, a couple of sentences and then we'll end it.
I definitely hope to see a lot more initiatives coming along from artists. I would love to see a lot more very low budget to zero budget exhibitions happening, because I think that is extremely empowering, especially that the money always resides with the institutions. So that is what I would really hope to see, if that answers.
Sara or Wejdan?
I guess for me, it's also about hopefully seeing more grassroots initiatives, to see artists being supported within and out of the institutional system, and for us to kind of grow the local and the regional art community together. So I guess that's my hope in the future.
Definitely echoing, both Walid and Wejdan. I think that, institutions can be a very intimidating place to enter into. And, the creation of Banat was merely just kind of doing something in my own time and on my own terms. And I think that freedom of independence is really important to any artist or curator or whoever, to go, and if you have an idea, just don't be afraid, I guess, and just go out and do it and start.
Definitely. I agree with all you guys, and okay, sorry for the noise, but just wanted to thank you all for your time and efforts today, sharing your experiences, your opinions, and just your thoughts with all of us today. And yeah, so thank you all. And I mentioned previously that the websites are in the comment or the chat box, and you can find their Instagrams on the post that I had previously posted. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.